Hey movie fans, I've often talked about The Dark Knight and how it's not only one of my favorite movies of all time, but one of the most impactful to the comic book movie genre. However, while The Dark Knight rightfully still gets all the love and attention nowadays, its predecessor doesn't get talked about nearly as much anymore. Which is a shame because I think Batman Begins is a masterclass in the genre and an unsung hero in the comic book movie world landscape. So, in honor of the film's 20th anniversary, oh God, that sentence makes me feel old. Let's take a look back at the 2005 classic, Batman Begins. Before we go into the movie itself, I think it's important to give some context as to what the state of Batman as a franchise was at the time. After the critical and financial disaster that was 1997's Batman and Robin, Warner Bros. Was weighing its options for the future of the Caped Crusader. At one point, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin director Joel Schumacher was reportedly set to return for another Batman movie. However, taking feedback about the comedic tone and cartoonish style of Batman and Robin, Schumacher would have returned the series back to its darker roots. Allegedly, the movie would have seen Nicolas Cage play Jonathan Crane, aka the Scarecrow, as the primary antagonist. The movie would have had Batman thrown in Arkham Asylum and dealing with Scarecrow's fear toxin, and would have seen the return of all the previous movie's villains, including Danny DeVito's Penguin, and the big one, Jack Nicholson, returning as the Joker. Ultimately, Warner Bros. Thought the series needed a complete refresh, so that project would eventually stall out. Fast forward to the year 2000, and Requiem for a Dream director Darren Aronofsky is hired by Warner Bros. To direct a live-action adaptation of the iconic Batman comic, Batman Year One. Aronofsky even got the original writer of that comic, Frank Miller, to pen the script for the project. The movie was set to be a hard R-rated version of the comic that would have seen a dark and gritty take on how Bruce Wayne became Batman. Aronofsky was looking to cast Joaquin Phoenix for the role of Bruce Wayne, but eventually Aronofsky and Warner Bros. Couldn't see eye to eye on the project, and that version of the story fell by the wayside. Still interested in doing a version of the Year One story, Warner Bros. Would get a call from one of their young, up-and-coming directors expressing interest in the project. The name? Christopher Nolan. Around this time, Christopher Nolan was an up-and-coming director with only 3 feature-length directing credits to his name at this point, with the most recent being his first movie for Warner Bros., Insomnia. Insomnia proved to be a modest hit for Nolan as the film had a production budget of $46 million and ended up making $114 million worldwide, while also garnering critical acclaim for its 2 lead actors, Al Pacino and Robin Williams. Despite his lack of experience with big-budgeted productions, Christopher Nolan might have actually always been the perfect candidate to direct a Batman movie, even going so far back as his first movie. Nolan's first full-length movie was a title from 1998 called Following, which sees a lonely man, played by Jeremy Theobald, following a different person each day, only to one day end up following a thief. The thief, a man named Cobb, the same name as Leonardo DiCaprio's thief character in Inception, shows the man how to break into places, and the story only gets twistier and more Nolan-y from there. But, in a truly eerie bit of career foreshadowing, one of the first places Cobb and the stranger break into is an apartment with a very noticeable sticker on the door. A very noticeable Batman logo. A whole 7 years before Batman Begins. Nolan has openly talked about his love and appreciation for Batman as a character, but by his own admission, he acknowledges he wasn't the biggest comic book nerd. Enter the film's co-writer, David S. Goyer. Knowing he didn't know the comics as well as others, Nolan went to writer David S. Goyer to help pen the script. Goyer already had some superhero credits to his name, having already written the Wesley Snipes Blade trilogy, as well as the Crow City of Angels, but the less said about that one, the better. And following his work on the Dark Knight Trilogy, Goyer would go on to write Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, and Ghost Rider Spirit of Vengeance.
Oh no!
But Goyer and Nolan both wanted to explore the origin of Batman, and not just the night in the alley with his parents. They wanted a Batman story that showed the events in between and leading up to the creation of the Batman persona. Christopher Nolan has expressed in interviews that one of his biggest inspirations for Batman Begins was Richard Donner's Superman. He was hoping to do a well-rounded origin for the character that could reintroduce them to a modern audience. He wanted to follow this character in their early stages and get the audience invested in the man before the hero, for audiences to spend time with and care about Bruce Wayne long before he ever puts on the cape and cowl. To do that, Just like how Donner's Superman needed Reeve as the perfect Clark Kent and Superman, the film would need to find the perfect actor for both Bruce Wayne and Batman. Christian Bale was actually the first name Christopher Nolan approached to play Batman, sensing that Bale would excel in the dual role. The big hang-up at the time, however, was Christian Bale's weight and figure. While under consideration for the part of Batman, Bale was about to start filming his role for the movie The Machinist, a role that saw the actor slim down to a dangerously small 110 pounds. But wanting to portray Bruce Wayne, Bale worked hard to put the weight back, going so far as to overcorrect and showing up to production weighing in at around 220 pounds. But once that was all figured out, it was full steam ahead with Bale donning the cape and cowl as Batman. Bale was an inspired bit of casting as he brings the intensity needed for Batman, but also the humanity needed for Bruce Wayne. There's an obvious comparison to be made between Bale's performance in the Batman movies and his role as Patrick Bateman in 2000's American Psycho. Both see the actor playing a rich aristocrat character that hides their truer, darker persona from the world in a physically demanding role. But at the same time, I think that comparison might undercut just how good and nuanced his portrayal in Batman Begins truly is. Patrick Bateman is just an absolutely insane man on the brink, if not already gone insane before we even meet him. Despite how some viewers may see him, Patrick Bateman isn't meant to be a cool, relatable, or sympathetic character. It's an extremely entertaining and engaging performance, but one that's supposed to alienate the character from the audience. Bruce Wayne, on the other hand, needs to have the audience behind him and get people to be invested in him and his dual identities. It's a lot tougher to get an audience to love you than it is to get an audience to hate you, and that's where Bale really shines. He does such a good job of playing this character that you fully believe would become Batman, but is never so emotionally distant or cold that you can't still sympathize or connect with him. I think at times as comic book fans, it's so easy to focus on the cool factor of Batman, and believe me, I'm guilty of it as well, that we overlook how human he is at the end of the day. Some of my favorite moments of the Christian Bale tenure as Batman are Bruce Wayne moments, like the "why do we fall" moment. I applaud the fact that in Batman Begins, we don't even get to see Bruce suited as Batman until halfway through the movie because we've been building up Bruce Wayne so much. But when Batman does finally make his grand entrance, holy crap, it's glorious. For me personally, this is my favorite I'm Batman scene in live action. Sure, the Keaton one is cool too, but I didn't grow up with that version as much, and Bale just has the menace and intimidation I expect from Batman. I know Bale's Batman voice has become a meme at this point, but in Begins, the voice isn't quite as exaggerated as it will be later on, especially in The Dark Knight Rises, so it works for me. My all-time favorite Batman will always be Kevin Conroy. That man was just perfect. But as far as live-action versions go, Bale is currently my favorite. I say currently because I think the potential is there for Pattinson to someday take that mantle, but as it stands right now, he only has one movie to compare against, so put a pin in him as the best Batman for later discussion. And sure, there's elements of other Batman actors that I really like. I liked Keaton, and I think if given better writing, Affleck could have been a generational Batman portrayal, but as it stands, he's the best looking Bat with arguably the best fight choreography of any Batman movie, including Begins. If I did have any critiques of Bale's Batman portrayal, it's that I wish the combat was a little better. The fight scenes, while fine, are a bit clunky, and I imagine that's more of a result of the suit than anything else. You could also make the same case for Keaton's Batman and his more limited mobility. I guess when you have a really cool suit, it just means you can't move as well. Which brings up the Batman Begins suit itself. I absolutely adore this suit. Costume designer Lindy Hemming absolutely knocked it out of the park. I actually prefer this version of the Batsuit much more than the version we would get in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. I get the new suit was made for mobility and convenience, but man, does that Begin suit just look better on screen in my eyes. It just works better for those scenes when Batman has to hide in the shadows or pick off goons in the dark, just like the Arkham games. A whole 4 years before Arkham Asylum. I love the sense of dread and fear that this version of Batman is able to convey thanks to Bale's performance in the suit. It's an infamously difficult task to find someone who can accurately portray both Bruce Wayne and Batman, and I think Bale absolutely nails it. But any leading actor in a movie is only as good as the supporting cast around them, and Batman Begins again excels in this department. Once again taking inspiration from Donner's Superman, Christopher Nolan has stated that he wanted to flesh out the rest of the cast with highly esteemed and respected actors who could further legitimize the material, similar to Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando's casting in Superman. To that end, I'd argue Nolan assembled one of the most stacked casts in any comic book movie. Firstly, he made the fantastic call to cast two-time Academy Award winner Michael Caine as Alfred Pennyworth. I'd argue that in all the various live-action versions of Alfred we've gotten, we've never had a bad miscast. All have been stellar in their own ways, but for me, Michael Caine was the perfect Alfred. He was the perfect blend of the dry wit of Alfred from Batman the Animated Series and the surrogate father figure role that Alfred always is in the comics. The relationship between Alfred and Bruce here feels like an actual partnership, not just one guy working for another, as sometimes is the case in Batman media. Alfred is a vital piece of Batman's crusade here, and I love the emphasis the movie puts on his and Bruce's relationship, and I really chalk that up to the amazing chemistry between Bale and Caine. Then you get Morgan Freeman as Lucius Fox, which, I'll be honest, this movie was actually my introduction to Lucius Fox as a character. I wasn't really aware of the character before seeing Batman Begins, so now when I do read the character in the comics or see him in other animated stuff, I just picture Morgan Freeman. It's clear Christopher Nolan always wanted to direct a James Bond movie because Lucius basically acts as the trilogy's version of Q from MI6, the dude with the gadgets. But Freeman, because he's Morgan Freeman, turns what could be a throwaway character into a really fun and engaging supporting character among Batman's allies. Normally, I don't love overly explained superhero stuff, but I absolutely love seeing Fox walk through all the gadgets and tech with Bruce. With Freeman as the guide, walking through the foundational elements of Batman just becomes that much cooler. Like, heck yeah, show me all the cool hidden stuff in this secret underground off-the-books vault. Now, the bit of casting I've seen cause some debate online is Katie Holmes as Rachel Dawes. I see a lot of people preferring Maggie Gyllenhaal's portrayal as Rachel in The Dark Knight and putting down Holmes' version of the character. For me, personally, I actually like Katie more in the role. She's never been an actress that I've had strong feelings towards one way or the other, but for Batman Begins, I thought she fit the role well. I thought her and Bale had better chemistry than Bale and Gyllenhaal, and I bought that these two individuals were actually childhood friends. There's a palpable bond and connection between these two, and she was a solid enough character. Will I argue that she's a great character? Definitely not, but not the worst either. On the flip side, and absolutely not the worst, the best in fact, is Gary Oldman as Detective, not Commissioner, Gordon. I love that a few times in Batman Begins, you get a well-established actor and basically play them against type. The first of these is Oldman's portrayal as Gordon. For most of his career up until this point, Oldman played bad guys, characters like Lee Harvey Oswald in JFK, Stansfield in Leon the Professional, Dracula in Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, and of course, Ivan in the all-American classic Air Force One. This time around though, he's playing the straight as an arrow good guy, and it's a refreshing change of pace that he's really good at. Maybe it's because he already got some training as the good guy in a Warner Brothers movie, because Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban came out just a year earlier in 2004, and that's a movie that plays him both as the bad guy and the good guy. But Oldman's Gordon, like Caine's Alfred, is one of my absolute favorites, and he feels ripped right out of the comics. He looks exactly like Gordon in Batman Year One, the comic that this movie takes its heaviest inspiration from. He portrays world weariness, yet optimistic so well, and it's easy to root for him as the moral sanity in an increasingly insane Gotham. The other playing against type casting is Liam Neeson as Henry Ducard / Ra's al Ghul. Up to this point, Neeson was often cast as the good guy, the everyman, the father figure type. Roles like Oscar Schindler in Schindler's List, Valjean in Les Mis, Qui-Gon in Star Wars, and even later on in this very year of 2005 with Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as the majestic Aslan. But Batman Begins uses that audience expectation of Liam as the good guy to deliver a great villain twist. Because for the first half of this movie, he is playing his usual type of character, this mentor figure that takes someone under their wing, only to pull the rug out from under you and have him be revealed as Ra's al Ghul. I remember watching Batman Begins for the first time and being absolutely shocked at that reveal, going, Liam Neeson is playing a bad guy? But they do it so effectively, and full credit to Neeson's performance, that it wasn't a huge logic leap to get to that point. He came across like a natural villain. Granted, one that's not very similar to the comic book Ra's al Ghul, but one that was perfect for the story that they were telling. If there is one casting in Batman Begins that could almost be counted as a steal, speaking in sports terms, it would be Cillian Murphy as Jonathan Crane, aka Scarecrow. Up till this point, Murphy had starred in Danny Boyle's 28 Days Later, but wasn't the household name that he is today thanks to Oppenheimer. He was just an up-and-coming that actually didn't originally try out for Scarecrow, but Bruce Wayne instead. Similar to how Tom Hiddleston auditioned for Thor before being cast as Loki, Cillian Murphy auditioned for Batman, even donning the Batman Forever suit before Nolan made the smart move to have Murphy play the villainous Scarecrow instead. Clearly, Nolan saw the potential in Murphy as he would cast him for several more movies of his, including Inception, Dunkirk, and of course, Oppenheimer. Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow is also the only villain to return in all 3 movies in the Dark Knight Trilogy in some capacity, so clearly Nolan liked working with him. Batman Begins also starts Nolan's trend of reusing actors he likes working with on multiple occasions. Michael Caine was in 8 Christopher Nolan movies before his retirement, Cillian Murphy has been in 6 Nolan films, and Christian Bale was in 4. And Nolan has even had cameos for people from earlier in his career. Remember his first feature film, Following, with the Batman sticker on the door? Well, Jeremy Theobald, the lead actor of that movie, can be seen in a cameo in the Batman Begins climax. And one last thing casting-wise before we move on. Hi, Joffrey from Game of Thrones. We've talked enough about the brilliance of Batman Begins' casting, now let's talk about the brilliance of its story. Batman Begins, as the name implies, is an origin story for Batman and the world he inhabits. Taking heavy inspiration from Batman Year One written by Frank Miller, the movie works because it tells a clear and concise story about what makes Bruce Wayne Batman, while not simply rehashing old elements from previous movies. Sure, there's some stuff that are basically prerequisites for a Batman movie, like the death of the Waynes in Crime Alley, but the movie tries new and fresh ways to tell the story, like adding in characters that weren't originally in the comic, like Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul. Both villains, in retrospect, were odd choices for Nolan to go with for an origin movie. Odd because Christopher Nolan movies, especially with the Dark Knight Trilogy, are movies very much grounded in reality, and Scarecrow and Ra's al Ghul are both characters that are a bit more fanciful. Scarecrow has hallucinogenic gases that causes its victims to have otherworldly visions of their greatest fears come to life. And Ra's al Ghul in the comics is an ancient being that has been kept alive for centuries due to the magical healing properties of the Lazarus Pit, essentially coming back time and time again, being reborn. Both of these characters, on paper, shouldn't work for a realistic Batman movie, but they really, really do because they lay the foundation for what the whole trilogy will be about. Scarecrow represents the fear element, and Bruce's need to conquer his own fear while learning to harness fear for his own advantage. Batman Begins is all about fear and failing and getting back up in the face of said fear. It comes back to the line from Thomas Wayne that Alfred repeats later. Why do we fall? So we can learn to pick ourselves up. It's this embracing of fear that allows Bruce to fully become Batman and help Gotham pick itself back up. It's a theme that comes up and comes full circle in The Dark Knight Rises when Bruce has to embrace the fear again after losing to Bane. That's a whole other discussion for another day, but Nolan's use of fear throughout the trilogy takes root early on here, and I think it's done beautifully. Ra's al Ghul, on the other hand, is an interesting character for this story, and one that I'm only just now fully appreciating while writing the script for this video. Like I said, in the comics, Ra's is able to live longer than any mortal human should due to a magical pool, essentially. He carries on for generation after generation because of the Lazarus Pit. Here, there's no Lazarus Pit, at least to our knowing, but Ra's still finds ways to live on. At the beginning, he tries passing off one of his henchmen as Ra's to Bruce, only for us to discover he is the real Ra's later. He continues to stress the idea to Bruce that in order to succeed, one must make themselves more than just a man. You must devote yourself to an ideal, and in the process, make yourself a symbol, a legend, something that lasts for generations and generations. While he may not have a Lazarus Pit, I love the idea of having Ra's al Ghul essentially teach Batman how to live forever, how to become a symbol. Bruce says on his way back to Gotham after training with Ra's, "As a man, I'm flesh and bone, I can be ignored, I can be destroyed. But as a symbol, I can be incorruptible, I can be everlasting." It means that Batman is more than just Bruce Wayne. It's a symbol meant to be carried on forever that can never be destroyed. It's something we see come back around once Nolan makes The Dark Knight Rises and the Batman baton is passed down to John Blake, because Batman will always be more than just one man. So while Scarecrow and Ra's seem like out of left field choices for villains in a Batman origin movie, they ended up being the perfect representations of the themes of the trilogy and what make Batman so special. A character that conquered his fear and trauma, used it to help others, and created a legacy long after he's gone. So all these years later, what is the legacy of Batman Begins? Naturally, when discussions about the Dark Knight Trilogy come up, most of it focuses on The Dark Knight, and to a lesser extent, The Dark Knight Rises, with Begins seemingly getting overshadowed. And not to take anything away from those other movies, The Dark Knight especially, I feel like Batman Begins is underrated in just how important it was for the genre. Begins was the CPR to Batman that the franchise so desperately needed following the failings of Batman and Robin. It breathed new life into a series that had theatrical roots as far back as the 60s, yet felt as contemporary and modern as any other superhero movie at the time. One could even argue that this, as well as 2002's Spider-Man, became the modern superhero origin movie template that's still being followed to this day. Christopher Nolan took the superhero origin method from Richard Donner's Superman and put it in the 21st century, layering it in gritty realism. People point at The Dark Knight for turning the superhero genre into a more serious and grounded one, but the foundations of that really start with Batman Begins. So a lot of the more gritty and realistic superhero movies that have become the norm owe at least part of their success to Batman Begins. It was such a successful formula that over the last 20 years of comic book movie adaptations, heck, movie adaptations in general, have tried to replicate it to varying degrees of success. It's only recently that it looks like we may finally be moving past that era into one of campiness and more lighthearted fun again, something that was out of style when Batman Begins first debuted. What's old is new again and all that. All that to say, despite grossing over $370 million worldwide and being the opening chapter in one of the biggest movie trilogies of all time, I still can't help but think Batman Begins is a little underappreciated. It has an incredibly stellar cast, told a fantastic origin story, became a modern template for the superhero genre, and got the Batman franchise back to a respectable place. I would still say The Dark Knight is the better movie, arguably my favorite movie of all time, but Begins is more rewatchable to me. I could put that on whenever and never get sick of it, from its many great and iconic moments to the incredible score by Hans Zimmer, all the way to that fantastic end stinger teasing the arrival of the Joker. Batman Begins is a superhero classic I still love revisiting 20 years later.